Yeah, I was, when I did the baby class, I was kind of disturbed. I didn't realize how long you would wait before going in.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that scares me as far as just, I'm just. Contractions and times up and
You have to wait until they're close to it.
yeah.
Which class for boys?
I'm doing that mother babysitter.
Oh, great. I did mother babysitter too.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, and at United.
Okay.
Are you at Minneapolis? Are you in Minneapolis?
I'm in Minneapolis, yeah.
Well, I was, I've got friends who read at that one. Not the one in St. Paul.
Yeah, I was closer, so I was in South Minneapolis, but we just moved to Northeast. It's a little bit further, but we're.
Oh, serious?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're great. I love the nurses there.
Yeah.
The nurses are really what makes the difference for me.
Yeah.
They were just wonderful. They were like about to strike at the time.
Oh my gosh, okay, well that.
But they weren't. Like, I would have changed hospitals, I think, if there had been a strike.
Right.
So, no, everything was great.
Oh, good.
Made a good choice.
Yeah, I still need to do like the pre-registration thing. Cause I was like, yeah, I mean, I guess they said you could just come in, but I was like, am I supposed to let someone know?
What are you feeling? Are you feeling good?
You know, I feel good.
But next year, now
It's getting harder doing this.
I agree.
And I,
Carrying stuff.
yes, and like I usually am by myself.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so like the equipment and everything is like, I think more than anything, it's like, just in the last 2 weeks, I just got really tired. And like, I'm not the type to ever nap, like I hate taking naps.
Yeah.
And I've been like constantly napping, and I guess I wasn't prepared for like how tired I would feel.
It takes a lot out of you just walking around.
Yeah.
It's weird. You're used to like working out and doing it, but being very active.
Yeah.
Like walking around is kind of your workout.
Right, yeah, breathing feels really like hard all the time. Yeah.
Exactly.
Do you notice a difference with the second one?
Honestly, got like probably breather faster.
Okay, yeah, I've heard that.
But I had more tired earlier.
I think this is the best.
Too. When I was covering the state fair, I was just like,
Yes.
just walking around and stop and sit for like every 15 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, I definitely felt that earlier this time.
Okay.
Joe Medici got the job that I was at.
Yeah, it was a big difference.
Yeah.
It was pretty easy last year. So far, so good. This time, like, having big problems. It's felt pretty similar.
Yeah, I have noticed that with, like, I wasn't sure when people were like, oh, you're so small. And then you're like, oh, there's something wrong. But then I found that like a lot of times, yeah, first, yeah. Yeah, and then, I don't know if it ever moves, but my placenta was like, okay. So I wasn't feeling the baby pickles symptoms that other people did. So then, you know, you're like looking up things on that, you're like, why don't I feel anything? You know? And like now I do, but like it took a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's good.
Yeah. Google's not good.
Don't Google it.
I know, I don't know why I do.
What station do you work at?
I'm here for 11. My name's Heidi.
Hi, I'm Layla.
Nice to meet you. Where are you with?
Start to be
Oh, nice. Yeah, nice to meet you.
World in Motherhood.
Oh, man, yeah.
Fun, it's an adventure.
Yeah, I think this weekend we're gonna try to get at least all of, so we just moved into a house like 2 months ago. I think we're gonna try to move all the stuff out of the nursery and try to make it look a little nicer. Right now it's just like boxes.
I don't think I unpacked my nursery until like 4 months after my son was born because he was just sleeping in there.
That's what I heard, yeah.
It was like people feel like they need to make it all perfect.
Right.
And it's not, you don't need it.
Yeah, that's
Just need a place to change your baby.
Yeah.
The diapers. And then
that's kind of, yeah, we We already have like the side sleeper, so that makes me proud.
Sounds like good. Nice to meet you.
Oh, really? To the right of the podium there. We have, he said he didn't want to, so, let's say we kind of crowd up here. And, I know we got a big crowd here, so do our best to kind of line up here. And, I think we're all ready.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Morning, good afternoon, everyone. Everyone ready? I'm Dennis Gerhardstein. I'm the Public Information Officer for the Ramsey County Attorney's Office. We, as you can see, have a lineup for you. So the County Attorney will kind of play MC and roll from the next person to the next, so you know exactly who's speaking. At the end, we will do Q&A, and I'll run that from over here as I typically do. And we will ask that folks up here repeat your question, because we do have a YouTube audience who is viewing us live, so we'll have a chance to kind of convey to them what your question was. So, thank you for being here. I'm going to have John Choi start it off.
Good afternoon. My name is John Choi, and I have the blessing of being able to serve the people of Ramsey County as their elected county attorney. And today, we are all gathered here today to do something that's very important, to say some things that have needed to be said for a very, very long time, and to also demonstrate to the public what change and what a better version of public safety and justice can look like in a community. Nothing will ever change unless we are all pulling together. And I can also tell you, just having been in this role as the county attorney for the past decade, and also the city attorney for before that, we're going to announce a number of policy changes and some collaboration on that work. But I know that for a fact that culture will eat policy for lunch any day. And nothing will change unless we actually have courageous people, leaders, who will step forward to do the right thing to advance justice in our community. And so today is really about that. We have a very, very distinguished group of people here today, and you're going to hear from many of them. And as they come up, I'm going to introduce them and frame kind of some of their remarks. But before I do that, today I want to say that we're releasing and are announcing a prosecution policy in my office, in the county attorney's office. And this prosecution policy, like I said before, isn't going to change the world if I act alone. And this prosecution policy is about stating something for me that is important and fundamentally that the public needs to hear. You know, I used to be a prosecutor that believed that the type of policing where police will look for minor traffic violations, and then if we have some pretext to pull somebody over because there's a brake light out or whatever it might be, that conducting a further investigation was good policing. I was raised to believe that. But over the course of the last many years, the conversations that we've had in our community, the tragedies that we've had in our community, I no longer believe that. I believe that actually, and if you do a Google search of just pretextual traffic stops, you will be amazed to see and find the level of research and thought and opinion that exists, not just in this community, but all over the country, about how this type of policing practice really does not deliver public safety. In fact, much of the research suggests that the actual recoveries of contraband, of drugs and guns is less than 2%. And so for the longest time, we have been policing in a way that is going after that 2%, but not recognizing the harm that has been done to communities. I think we all know people who have been pulled over more often than others. And oftentimes, the community that's impacted the most are our BIPOC communities, especially our African American community. And these voices have been present for decades, since the advent of the car and more people driving in this country. People have been coming to the forefront talking about these inequitable practices and how there's disproportionate impact. In fact, in St. Paul, in my community, where I live, African American drivers are stopped 4 times more than others. And so we can debate about the why these things happen, and we've been doing that way too much. This is not about winning an argument. It's about actually recognizing that the end result is unjust and that we have to make some changes. And so as the prosecutor, I have the power to say what comes into the front door of my office. And for the longest time, too long, we have perpetuated many of these harms by charging cases that are the product of one of these low-level traffic equipment violations, a non-public safety stop, as we say. And so, for me, I no longer want to do that. I want to stand with our community here today to do justice and to say that we are not going to encourage this type of practice. But as I said before, me acting alone isn't going to change the world. And so over the course of the past year, I have engaged in many conversations with our law enforcement leaders, our chiefs in Ramsey County. And through those conversations, we have gotten to a place where I believe that we're actually doing something together to make the changes that are needed to improve public safety and to have a better version of justice for all people in Ramsey County. In June, I convened a meeting of law enforcement leaders in Ramsey County, and I asked them this. I told them it was no secret about what my thoughts are about this type of enforcement of traffic violations, and I laid it down. And I said, this is what I feel, and this is what I think, and this is what I think must change. And I asked the law enforcement leaders in Ramsey County to join me. And so as a part of the action that is being taken today, with the action that Chief Axtell took this morning, and with the action that the Roseville Police Chief on August 1st has already taken, and by the way, Chief Erica Scheider from Roseville is the first chief in this state to actually enact a policy to reduce these traffic stops and also acknowledge the historical harm that has been done to communities and to acknowledge the racial disparity that exists in these traffic stops. And that work in Roseville began a few years ago. And today, they're a community that 80% of their traffic violations are moving violations. And so they're making a lot of progress. And then with this formal written policy that the city of Roseville enacted on August 1st, we are working very collaboratively to actually make these changes. In addition to St. Paul and Roseville, I can also tell you that the city of Maplewood, through their police chief, Brian Beardeman, has also indicated, and by the way, these quotes and statements from all of these police chiefs are going to be in your media packet. But in Maplewood, they will be taking steps this fall to incorporate this work to reduce these traffic stops into their strategic plan and into their policies come January of 2022. The city of St. Anthony, they also have made lots of progress since 2018. Chief Mangseth has taken action to reduce these traffic the non-moving violations, and today they're at about 78% moving violations. And they too will be moving forward with a policy very shortly. In addition, the New Brighton Police Department as well is also coming together to collaborate and to say out loud that we need to reduce these types of traffic stops. And they will have a public safety commission meeting on Monday where they will actually have this conversation. And so there's a total of 5 chiefs out of 9 agencies in Ramsey County. And I feel like with the work and the conversations that have taken place and the work that is ahead, collaboratively, we will be able to actually reduce these traffic stops, to reduce disparity, and to further trust and confidence between community and police. And today, in this nation, there is no better time to start bridging those divides. And today, it's also not about just law enforcement and prosecution. And I think this is really the first time in this nation where a prosecutor and the police together have decided to pull in the same direction and together, but also you'll be hearing from Dr. Eric Jolly, who is the CEO of Minnesota Philanthropy Partners, who will also be announcing an initiative from the philanthropy community to support this work. So again, nothing happens unless we are all pulling together. And today, a part of what we're announcing today is that we indeed are. I will leave you with a quote that I want everybody to think about. It's a quote from Brian Stevenson, the author of Just Mercy and the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative. He says, "You can't do reconciliation work, you can't do restoration work, you can't do racial justice work, you can't create the outcome you desire to see until there has been truth-telling. And truth-telling has to happen when people who have been victimized and marginalized and excluded and oppressed are given a platform to speak, and everybody else has to listen." Today, these leaders in law enforcement who are here today, we're listening, and we're committed to making these changes. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Chief Julie Maidment for her remarks.
Thank you. I am here to show our support for our partners with the Ramsey County Attorney's Office and other law enforcement agencies in the county. For years, our organizations have engaged in meaningful conversations about traffic stops and what's in the best interest of our diverse communities. At the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want to achieve better public safety outcomes. We want to address the disparate impacts of some low-level traffic stops on our communities of color. And we want to ensure our practices are in line with community values and expectations. At the St. Paul Police Department, we are constantly working with our community to evaluate our efforts, to evolve when necessary, and to ensure we're building trust with the people we serve. This is something we've always done. And in this past May, St. Paul Police Chief Todd Axtell commissioned a working group to study traffic stops. I led this diverse group. It included community members from across the city, the NAACP, the African American Leadership Council, members of the St. Paul Black Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, Move Minnesota, MAD Minnesota, representatives from the City Attorney's Office, HERO, the Ramsey County Attorney's Office, and our very own police officers. After much research and robust discussion, that group made recommendations about how we can better serve our community by reducing unintended consequences traffic stops have on St. Paul's diverse communities, and by focusing our resources on driving behaviors that most often cause crashes, injuries, and death. Today, we're in the process of rolling out new guidance to our officers. We heard loud and clear from the group that enforcing laws on the books is one of the ways we work to keep our streets safe. We need to be more deliberate in making sure we're doing so in an equitable manner. As we move forward, together with our partners, we're committed to continuing conversations, continuing to review our data, continuing to partner with our community to ensure that we're policing in a way that truly reflects our shared values. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Commissioner Carter.
Thank you very much. As Chair of the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners, I want to thank our County Attorney for the opportunity to be here today, along with Commissioners Jim McDonough and Trista Mattis Castillo, to express the support of the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners. We stand united in appreciation of the County Attorney's commitment to this policy change. It is long past time that minor infractions such as these be dealt with through means other than in a stressful encounter on the side of the road. Historically, these interactions have been a structural component of the criminalization of Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities who disproportionately experience stress-induced illnesses, even deaths from causes such as these traffic stops. Non-public safety stops have caused unnecessary trauma and disparities for people and neighborhoods who for generations have had to have the talk with our children about surviving these incidents. They breed distrust and they hamper and thwart the efforts of our peace officers to build trust, to repair and improve relationships that are critical for serving all of us. While County Attorney Choi has acknowledged and cannot end public safety traffic stops alone, today's policy change does use the office's authority to discourage them and to encourage a deeper dive by law enforcement and all our partners to expedite the examination of their policies and practices, and through the lens of equity, to be certain to disentangle from those that do perpetuate disparities and fail continually to keep us safe. Ramsey County is committed to a justice system that reflects and aligns with our community's values. This new policy reflects a direction that we have set and continue to pursue, working diligently in ongoing initiatives for systems transformation with our community, listening, and with our partners. We have worked with organizations such as Annie E. Casey, the Burns Institute, and now Vera Institute. We look forward to an ongoing engagement with our partners and with our community as we seek to explore more effective strategies with a vision of vibrant community. We are focused on goals of health and wellness, opportunity, and prosperity for all. We know we're not there yet. There is much, much work for all of us to do together. Once again, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Carter. I think next is Dr. Eric Jolly.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Eric Jolly, President and CEO of the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation. I can't tell you how powerful it is to stand here today and learn of the change which is about to happen. Our residents' trust has been undermined for far too long by practices of pulling over drivers for non-public safety reasons. Black members of our community, Indigenous members of our community are 4 times more likely than white members of our community to be stopped in these events. And the memory of them stays with you and builds with each event. I am delighted that we are taking this next step. One first step towards justice is the courageous recognition of injustice. Our county attorney, our police officers, our community leaders have spoken to this with courage. And the next step is to take action, and that's what's happening here. I want to applaud Attorney Choi, Chief Axtell, the leaders of Ramsey County, and especially our BIPOC community, who has not been thwarted over time, not lost hope, and never lost their voice, for helping make this change in policy and practice a reality. Our philanthropic community has a role to play in making certain that these efforts succeed. Along with the Minnesota Council on Foundations, our foundation recently convened a philanthropic leadership group from across the state who are standing in support of this. And I am delighted to announce that the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation will host a new fund, the Ramsey County Public Safety Fund. This fund has 3 primary purposes. First, to support research to tell this story again and again so that what is practiced here in St. Paul and Ramsey County becomes a model for our nation and its practice. Second, to support the infrastructure to allow us to not pull someone over. For no matter how kind your intent, the impact feels poor. And the third is to assist low-income motorists in our county to take care of the repairs so that they don't get a second note and that we have assured everyone's safety and well-being. I thank you for being here as we make this the model for our nation.
Thank you, Dr. Jolly. And next, I'd like to invite up Tyrone Terrell, who will be speaking on behalf of the St. Paul NAACP Black Ministerial Alliance and the African American Leadership Council.
Thank you, John. Again, Tyrone Terrell, President, African American Leadership Council. I have with me Reverend Thomas, the President of the Black Ministerial Alliance. And this is a day that's long overdue for us. And I know we talk about BIPOC and people of color, but it's been our people, Black people, that have been the ones been murdered over these crazy stops for no reason. We're talking about Philando Castile, Dante Wright, George Floyd, and on across America. We felt the pain of these stops, so we join this effort. We think it's a major step in the right direction. I have too many people in our community who talk about the fear of when lights come on. Is it gonna be my last time I see my family? And so this is a step in the right direction because a tail light, a license plate, headlight, whatever, shouldn't be a reason for somebody to be pulled over. And not just pulled over, but for us and members of our community that come to us, fear for their life. And so we think this is a great decision by Ramsey County Attorney Choi, the Police Department of St. Paul, and all of our community partners, because we strongly believe that this is not only good for community members, but also police officers who are not put in that position to have to make that stop that could change their life forever. I tell Chief Axtell all the time. I tell Chief Arredondo all the time. Your boss is not the mayor, the city council, community leaders, but one of your officers can make a decision to change your life forever and change the life of one of our families. So we stand in 100% support from the St. Paul branch of the NAACP, the Black Ministerial Alliance, and the African American Leadership Council supporting this new policy. So thank you.
And next, we have the Mayor of St. Paul, Milton Carter.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all of the speakers who have gone before. I'm Melvin Carter, I'm the mayor of St. Paul. And perhaps more importantly, I'm a child of St. Paul. I'm a child of a retired St. Paul police officer. I know many of you know that. And what that means is that growing up, I got to know an enormous number of St. Paul police officers. I got to know them at fight nights. I got to know them at Super Bowl parties. I got to know them at community events. I got to know them when they'd come over our house or we'd go over their house. And I often joke that when I turned 16 and started driving around our community, I got to meet a whole lot more St. Paul police officers. The story has already been told about the extent to which stops that don't necessarily have a direct impact on improving public safety have been leveraged historically as a part of our public safety framework in America. One of the reasons I ran for mayor in the first place, and one thing that we've heard loud and clear from community members across our city, is that we need a new public safety framework. We need a new approach. We need a new way because we are surrounded every day by reminders that our traditional approaches have not brought about the outcomes that we desire in our community. As a part of this, we launched at the beginning of my time in office our Community First Public Safety Framework. Our Community First Public Safety Framework has had input from over 1,000 St. Paul community members through the course of community meetings that we hosted several years back, and most recently the 48-member commission, Community First Public Safety Commission, that convened from the end of last year through the spring of this year. One of their strong findings as we think through this larger framework that really starts with supporting our St. Paul police officers, our emergency responders, by ensuring they have both the capacity and the community credibility that they need to do their job well. That commission brought us back strong findings and recommendations around alternative responses to 911 calls. They brought us back a recommendation to build an Office of Neighborhood Safety so that we can ensure that we're building a more proactive and data-driven approach to public safety. And they brought us back very strong recommendations around non-public safety stops. This work, and I thank our police department for taking action quickly and creating this task, this work group to build upon that work and the recommendations that we got from our Community First Public Safety Commission. This morning, our police department leadership emailed preliminary guidance to our officers on how to begin to implement this evolution in policing, this evolution in our public safety framework. That guidance that we got from that work group will prove key and be very helpful in combination with the work that we got from our Community First Public Safety Commission as we determine and build the written formal policies through which we'll advance this. That's important to advance this through those written and formal policies because those men and women who put on the uniforms and those men and women who get up every day and drive through our community deserve for us to be very clear and very specific about how we expect these interactions to play out and how we expect these interactions not to play out. It's been said that in St. Paul, it's been said today, and it's been documented in the media, that in St. Paul, African-American drivers are 4 times more likely to be pulled over. Once they're pulled over, they're 3 times more likely to be cited, and 9 times more likely to have a vehicle searched. We know that that must change. We know that those types of statistics are not helpful to the relationship that we know that we're proud of and that we know that we desire between our law enforcement and our community members here in St. Paul. And we know that changing that data, changing those trends, and continuing to push forward in what I think is a nation-leading conversation in St. Paul, and what I think is a nation-leading relationship between law enforcement and community members in St. Paul requires us to be on the front edge of this change. And that's why I'm appreciative of County Attorney Choi. We know that in St. Paul, we're not in an island. Some of the things that have been most impactful on our community in these past 5 years have happened in Falcon Heights, have happened in Brooklyn Center, have happened in Minneapolis. And so to be able to say, we're not just doing this as St. Paul in isolation, but we're doing this along with our county partners, we're doing this along with other cities, We're doing this along with community groups. We're doing this along with our St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation, who is always a critical partner for us in every critical endeavor that we undertake, is very, very important. Very soon, you will see from our office, from our city attorney's office, from our police department, that guidance that the chief emailed to our officers today evolved and into specific written citywide policy that we'll be able to share both with our officers and our community members so that we can be very clear on how we expect to build our future together in St. Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I bring up Kai Johnson, I want to also, the mayor just reminded me of something that I failed to mention about our policy, and I just want to make it clear that it's in the reporting. So we talked about today the prosecutor's policy around not prosecuting cases that come to our office that are solely the result of a non-public safety stop, right? And so all of you are going to get a copy of our policy, but there's a second piece of that policy that I think is also very important, and it's, I believe it's the first type of policy in the nation, which is also saying that we no longer favor officers asking people for consent to search their vehicle. That practice, in my view, is coercive, and it actually leads and breeds more distrust in our community. Think about the indignation of being asked to search your vehicle when you have nothing to hide, but you are suspected of criminal activity. So if there is no reason to ask for consent, we will, and if you present a case to us that's based solely on that, and you had no PC, no probable cause to even ask that, then we will also not prosecute that case. I spoke with Chief Axtell this morning, and he's going to certainly be incorporating that, and that's also something that actually came from one of our law enforcement leaders in the suburbs about a practice that also needs to change and to make sure that we lift up. So with that, I'm going to bring up Key Johnson from Vera. And Vera's been a wonderful partner in all of this, and before you come on up here, I want to just say that, you know, my thinking around this really changed a lot because of the engagement that I've been able to have with other fellow elected colleagues. And I remember as we were having a meeting, I think it was in New York, and we were thinking about things that we can do as prosecutors to kind of reshape what we do as ministers of justice and to do the right thing. One of the things was to stand and utilize our power to say that these things can't come into our door because they are unjust, right? And I remember when we posed that question about this very issue about 3 years ago, it made me very uncomfortable because I was thinking, oh my God, how do we do that, right? But with the support of Vera and the work that you're doing around reshaping prosecution, motion for justice, we're seeing that these things are possible and that prosecutors can and should be leaders in our communities to ensure that we have better public safety and better justice.
So with that, I just want to thank County Attorney John Choi for inviting us to work with him and allowing us to be a partner in his efforts to really reshape what it means for prosecutors to pursue justice. I also want to thank everyone on the stage for allowing us to come visit this beautiful city. I'm from Portland, Oregon. People have always said St. Paul is prettier than Portland, and I have to admit that there may be some truth to that after coming here today. But I also want to echo things that people have said on this podium. It's going to take a lot for us to reckon with our country's history of systemic oppression against people of color. And everyone can't do everything, but everyone can do something. And County Attorney Choi's actions today are an example of prosecutors doing something. This is an example of a policy that's based on research, data, and explicitly considering the impact on marginalized people when enacting a new initiative. We believe that other jurisdictions should look to this policy, and particularly prosecutors, as an example of what it looks like to center racial equity and pursue policies that will ultimately make all of us safer. Thank you.
Okay. I know you have some questions. I will, for our audience online, repeat them up front, but who would like to jump in with a question? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for the St. Paul Police Chief. Can you elaborate more about these emails that went out to police officers? Clearly, Mr. Choi is not going to be prosecuting these situations, but have you stopped actually doing these kinds of stops?
How do we state the question? Don't worry.
These discussions have, as I spoke earlier, these discussions have been ongoing communication about traffic stops. The guidance just rolled out today from the chief on what the guidance is on the traffic stops. And this all came from the work group that we've been involved in and continue to be involved in going forward.
So advice or new rules went out from the chief today about traffic stops in St. Paul?
Correct.
Can you elaborate what they are and when that becomes effective?
It's effective immediately, and if I could divert you to our PIO to get all the details on that, that would be most effective for me at this time, because I would be ill to dictate all of them at this time.
If I could just do one more follow-up. The county attorney alluded to the fact that this is not, these kinds of stops really don't yield that much in terms of prosecutions. If you throw out a figure of 2%. A lot of people may not believe that. What is the reality that you see as St. Paul police officers?
All traffic stops are important, and what we're trying to do is really focus the resources on what's most critically important as far as traffic-related stops right now. And that focus really is on pedestrian safety. It is on vehicle safety as far as moving, speeding, bike safety, keeping the vehicles in our roadways as safe as possible. And we're really focused on the moving violations.
Next question.
Yeah, for County Attorney Choi, you had mentioned there have been many moments that have been in your mind about making this move now. What was the final moment that happened that you said, I have to do this, we have to do this in this community?
Well, I think in our community, we've gone through such a lot of trauma, right? And certainly for me, I started saying this out loud after the murder of George Floyd. We all, I remember we had a retreat of, that was an emergency retreat after the murder of George Floyd, and we asked everybody that is a part of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council to answer one very simple question. Given what just had happened in our community and the civil unrest that we were experiencing, what change will you make, right? And that's when I started talking out loud about this and starting engaging in conversations with law enforcement leaders and asking them to take this journey, right? And so I started with a smaller group of people, but also too, you know, I've had a long journey around what justice is and should be in our community. You know, I was the prosecutor that prosecuted Geronimo Yanez, and that case, I will tell you, changed me profoundly. I'm a very different person. I see the world in a different way after that. And it's true of any conversations that I've had with Philando's family. Also, too, that informs my thinking about listening to those who have been impacted by these stops. Because as you will recall, in that particular case, Philando Castillo was stopped because of a broken taillight. And I've always maintained that what should have happened is that the officer truly believed that he was a robber from a few days before, that he should have conducted a felony traffic stop.
Mr. Choi, I want to give you a chance to respond to the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Executive Director. This is a statement he just released. He said basically the county attorney just announced his office won't uphold the law and won't prosecute those who break it. That's absurd and is a slap in the face to victims of crime. Ramsey County residents be warned, those that break the law won't even get a slap on the wrist. They'll get a high five from the county attorney and be left to commit more and more serious offenses. Reduction of crime and public safety for all should be our focus as the crime rate escalates, and this isn't it.
Those are not the values of the community that I serve and protect. I believe what you just read out loud is an outdated model of values that existed a long time ago, that still exist today. But it's those values that got us into, as a country, our mass incarceration crisis, the safety that many people don't experience in our communities. And it's also yielding lots of racial disparity in our justice system. So we need to make changes. You know, Commissioner Carter talked a little bit about this, but for decades, generations upon generations, we have asked African-American families to adapt to how they're being policed. And then we have civil unrest and we have all of these discussions, but nothing ever changes. If you're looking for an example of systemic injustice or systemic racism, that's it. This pattern that we have in America, where we don't change and we don't listen to the voices of those who have been impacted.
Other questions?
I am trying to get a better sense of, I guess, the scope and impact of the county policy, particularly as, you know, cities are maybe still considering or working on how they might roll out similar policies in their city attorney offices. You mentioned that, you know, only about 2% of traffic stops result in contraband. I guess, is it fair to say that a vast majority of citations resulting from these are ultimately going to work their way through city attorneys' offices for prosecution?
Right, thank you for that question, and this is something that Esme Murphy also touched on. Again, the amount of research and study that's available in America today is voluminous. They've done studies upon studies to show that the actual hit rate on actually recovering contraband is very, very small. Okay, that's a fact, all right? If anybody tells you differently, it's simply not true. They will trick you and make you believe that actually contraband is always found in these stops by showing you examples of this one time where we recovered this gun, and maybe there's a small handful of these occasions. We can all come up with those examples, but we have to really follow the data, right? And that's what I really encourage you to do. I think there's another part of your question that you got lost in my answer there, sorry.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, is it fair to say that a vast majority of traffic stop cases or citations ultimately are prosecuted through city attorneys?
Oh, thank you, right. And so in your packet, you will see that there's a quote from the Roseville City Attorney. Mayor Carter also talked about some changes that will be happening in the city. I have every faith that our city attorney, Lindsay Olson, will be working towards the spirit of the things that we're working on, that we want to reduce these traffic stops, that we want to address racial disparity, and we want to improve trust and confidence. Now, the other city attorneys throughout the county, I have already talked with them and will continue to talk with them. But for many of them, what they're going to do is they're going to look very much to the policies and practices of their police chief and their city council. So as an example, you'll see in your packet that Roseville Chief Erica Scheider has a quote, as well as the city attorney. They're very much in line, and so the spirit of what is happening here will certainly be honored by the city attorney, because many of these offenses are going to be at the lower level. They're actually misdemeanors, right? We're talking about non-public safety traffic violations, right? But what I can do at the county level is, for the juvenile cases, we have all of the cases, whether they're misdemeanor or felonies. And then on the adult side, we just handle the felonies. And so oftentimes I do think there's an incentive for police to conduct further investigation, to utilize these stops for that type of investigation. And what I'm saying is that I don't want to incentivize that behavior, because too many people, I think, are being ensnared in this type of practice. And these viewpoints and these facts and the clarion call for this type of change has been around for a long time. But we have not made those changes, and we believe that by making these changes, we're actually gonna make our community safer.
One quick question before we get to the last year. In our resource packet, when we send it out with our media packet, are some of those studies that John just referenced, so I'll make it very clear where to look for those. So, Rob?
In the months and the years to come, how will you be able to tell through data or tracking this, that your policy change has affected the policing change that you hope it does? How will you know?
Well, I think a great example for us in our community is Fayetteville, North Carolina. And in 2013, Chief Harold Medlock just said out loud to the public and directly to his staff. And he actually went to roll call trainings, and we actually brought Chief Medlock, retired Chief Medlock, into here at Ramsey County through Zoom to meet with Chief Axtell and Chief Scheider, and I can't remember who else was on the call. But they actually, because of some investments that they made, and thankfully to Dr. Eric Jolly, we're going to invest in research so that we're gonna first of all understand the current state of affairs about these traffic stops today, the baseline. And then we truly are all saying collectively that we want to reduce these and we want to be held accountable by our public that we serve. So over time, we'll be measuring this, and our North Star is to reduce those traffic stops, to address head-on racial disparity in these stops, and to improve trust and confidence in police and community, between police and community. That's exactly what they achieved in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I know that we can do it too. And again, I talked about, like, you know, we've got these policies, the prosecutor's got a policy now, we've got some police agencies that either have them or they're working towards it, right? But I also believe that we actually have leadership. And that's what really matters. Because it was Chief Medlock who, through his power of his office and his persistence, and him continuously stating this out loud to his public and to his officers over and over, and managing towards these outcomes, that he was able to achieve those things. I believe that here in Ramsey County and in St. Paul and all of our cities that surround St. Paul and Ramsey County and in the metro area and in the state of Minnesota and in our nation, that if we truly want to, we can achieve those outcomes. I want to also add one more thing about Dr. Jolly's important announcement today, that philanthropy is coming to the table to support these reforms. So one bucket, the fund, would be to fund the research and the data, to be transparent and to ensure that we're actually achieving public safety and addressing or meeting and realizing the goals that we set forth today. The second piece of this, and I want to make this very clear, is that we believe also that we need to have some form of an alternative. That we, you know, if somebody is driving without paid registration or a broken taillight, we should have some way to build out an alternative. And actually the committee, through the leadership of Julie Maidment, Deputy Chief Maidment, one of the suggestions that they came back with is to have some form of alternative where maybe the police officer who observed the condition can type into a computer of the license plate, and then a letter can be generated to the person telling the owner of the vehicle, I should say, that they need to take care of this condition, right? And then through that, we're hoping that that's a better way to enforce these particular laws, as you were kind of alluding to. Because I don't think that we have to have a traffic stop in this particular instance. And then thirdly, the fund that the philanthropy is also setting up, which I think is important too, is that we have to recognize that a lot of people in our community are under-resourced and they don't have the means or the financial ability to pay for these things. So we want to develop a way that we could provide that assistance so that everybody can have access to it.
If I can just ask.
If I can add to
One
that.
question, just one, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. And the question is, how will we evaluate the effectiveness of these measures? As we build the citywide policy that will evolve the preliminary guidance that our officers received from our police chief today, really I have three things in mind. One is eliminating the disparity that you've heard about today. We have the data to be able to show us what the disparities, where disparities exist within those traffic stops, the disparities that we've discussed today. we should consider unacceptable and we need to eliminate them. 2 is to improve community trust. We know we have conversations all the time, our police chief, our police officers, my office, we all have conversations all the time with community members about the credibility and underscoring that one of our most powerful public safety assets is that trust that has to flow between communities and the officers that serve us, and continuing to always protect, always advance, always promote that trust is very critical. And the third piece, and this gets to the question that was asked earlier about that County Attorney Troy was given the opportunity to respond to. We've tried building a public safety framework on responding to fear-based rhetoric and anecdotes. We've tried that. It has not worked. And one of the things that I think our officers will appreciate about this policy is it gives them the opportunity to focus their time, their energy, their resource on the things that actually make us less safe. Our chief has said moving violations need to be a focus. We've heard from our community groups that moving violations need to be a focus. And allowing our officers, giving our officers that clear guidance to say, this is where we do want you to focus our time on, will allow us to be able to see over time how we budget our officer time. As we think about in St. Paul through our Community First Public Safety Framework, we've discussed the amount of time officers spend on what we think of as some of those lower priority calls, those lower priority responses, and we want to free up officer time to focus on those issues, those instances of crime and violence and emergencies that occur in our city. So those are the 3 areas that I'll be looking at over time to evaluate the effectiveness of this measure, of this move.
Esme, we'll have you do the last question.
Mayor Carter may have just partially answered it. What do you say to people in Ramsey County, St. Paul, who are really genuinely worried about crime? They're scared, and they hear this, and they think that there might be a dialing back. What do you say to them?
Thank you. That's an important question. That's the important question. I think the first thing is those concerns are, well, actually the first thing I'll say is this. St. Paul, Ramsey County, we know have 2 dual truths where public safety is concerned. One is that we experience public safety outcomes that many other communities around the country and around the world who have our similar size and are comparable communities would love to be able to claim. But 2, that we also know that we don't stop there because even that is not good enough for us. Those concerns, as I alluded to earlier, I believe those concerns are the proof that we need a new approach, that just doubling down on doing more of the same things that we did last year and 10 years ago and 20 years ago won't produce the different, new, evolved, better outcomes that we all desire from our public safety system. I am proud to be a part of a community that never stops thinking about how we more effectively leverage and utilize our officer time, how we more effectively leverage and utilize all the resources that we put into our public safety system, how we continually be on the front edge of innovation and reinvention of how we promote a public safety, a safe community in our city. We are seeing opportunities. Yes, we are seeing opportunities, and in the trends that we're seeing downtown, we're seeing opportunities in the response to some of the strategies that we've built, the comprehensive, coordinated, and data-driven strategies that we've built over the past couple of years that we frankly have not seen before. And what I tell those residents is that those are the things, those promising practices are the things that we are going to continue to build upon. Today's announcement is an important part of that portfolio of strategies because it, like I said before, allows our officers to focus more and more and more of their time on those kind of intense issues of crime and violence that keep families up worried at night.
And I also wanted to add on behalf of Ramsey County Commissioners that we have a vision of a vibrant community where all are safe and healthy and valued and thrive. And we know we can't get there with an us-them mentality. You know, we are working to listen to those who have been involved in these traffic stops, who have experienced the building of records based upon one incident after the other to determine what really works for all of us for public safety. It does not work for us to continue to subject individuals in our community to unreasonable stops, search and seizure. That does not build a trajectory toward improved lives and contribution to our community. We have been on a path toward justice systems transformation for some time, and the work that we have done supports that valuing and thriving, valuing everyone in our community will help us to thrive. We look at the extraordinary incidences, even such as we have seen during COVID. We should be looking at the documentation that shows our decreased levels of crime over time, even given the transformation we have been and continue to pursue. Thank you.
Esme, I think you're getting a lot of answers. People want to address your question.
Let me just say to that question, our community is the most victimized community, from the crime level, from the murder level, so that we can support this policy. And I say to other communities, be quiet. Give it a chance to work first, and then talk to us. But if the NAACP, the Black Ministerial Alliance, and the African American Leadership Council can stand up here today and say we support it, then we say to any other community, unless you can show me numbers, that you're impacted the same way, not just by the murders, but crime, poverty, and the rest of it that contributes to this, then talk to us. But we need to give something a chance. And that's all we're asking to do here today, is give this policy a chance to make our community better. Thank you.
Mayor, let's give the last question to you and then we'll wrap up.
All right, thanks. This is a question for County Attorney Choi and our Deputy Chief Payment. What will happen if police do carry out what is considered a non-public safety traffic stop or ask to search a vehicle and officers find an illegally possessed gun or drugs?
Well, if they asked to, so if it was a product of an equipment stop, right, that we identify in our policy, all right? And there's absolutely no other PC at all, other types of suspicion, right? Then that case would be declined presumptively in our office. Now, let's just say that it wasn't a traffic stop, it was something else, like a non-public, it wasn't a non-public safety stop. But the officer asked for consent, and there was no reason at all to ask for that consent. Then again, the presumption would be that we would not prosecute that case because we do not want to incentivize that type of policing. That there is a better way to police, and we're coming up with some alternatives here, and you've heard, I think, the values of our community, that what we want our officers to be focused on, if it's talking about traffic enforcement, it really is. I mean, I live in a neighborhood in St. Paul, and one of the things that we care about the most is people driving too fast in the residential areas. It's a big deal, right? DWI, you know, all those things that really matter. And then, of course, on top of that, with all of the challenges that we have with violence and shots fired, those are things that we need to really focus and double down on. Those are the strategies and the things that we really need police and prosecutors to be working on, not these low-level traffic violations that have created a lot of distrust and harm to our community.
Thank you very much. As I mentioned, we will be sending out a media packet, hopefully in the next 20, 30 minutes. We'll be on. And thanks for being